A young boy vanishes from a park without a trace. Decades pass, the world moves on, until one unexpected discovery changes everything. A mystery unsolved for 70 years is about to be revealed. But is the truth too late? It was a crisp February afternoon in 1951. The air was filled with the laughter of children, the distant chatter of parents, and the rhythmic creak of swings at Jefferson Park in Oakland, California. 6-year-old Luis Albino and his older brother Roger ran across the playground, their shoes kicking up dust as they chased each other. It was supposed to be just another carefree day, until everything changed. One moment, Luis was there. The next, he was gone. Roger looked around, his heart pounding. "Luis?" he called. No answer. He searched the slides, the swings, the monkey bars. Nothing. Panic started to creep in. Other kids were still playing. Parents were still talking. But something was wrong. Something was missing. Luis Albino had vanished into thin air. A mother's worst nightmare was unfolding. His family's joy turned to terror. The police were called. Officers rushed to the park. "Have you seen this boy?" they asked, showing Luis' picture to anyone who would listen. Witnesses spoke of a woman, an unfamiliar figure, seen walking away with a small child. But no one could say who she was. No one knew where she went. Search teams combed the area. Flyers were printed and posted. Days turned into weeks. Hope flickered like a candle in the wind. And then the case went cold. For years, Luis's name became a painful whisper among those who remembered. His mother never stopped searching, never stopped waiting. His brother Roger, the last person to see him, carried the weight of that day for the rest of his life. The world moved on, but for one family, time stood still. 70 years passed, 70 birthdays missed, 70 Christmases without a brother, a son, and uncle. Luis Albino was no longer a missing child. He was a ghost of the past. Time has a way of moving forward, even when the past is left unresolved. After the frantic search for Luis Albino, the park slowly returned to normal. Children played again, parents gathered once more. But for one family, Jefferson Park was no longer just a playground. It was a reminder of loss, of unanswered questions, of a mystery that had no end. For months, officers combed through every possible lead. Witness reports trickled in, some claiming to have seen a woman, others saying they saw nothing at all. No one could identify the kidnapper. No clear description, no confirmed direction, just silence. And in that silence, hope started to fade. Luis's mother spent countless nights staring at the front door, hoping, praying that one day she'd hear a knock, that someone would bring her little boy home. But the knock never came. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then the years started slipping by. She refused to move on. How could she? Her baby was out there somewhere. Was he safe? Did he even remember his real name? Was he asking for her? The not knowing was worse than anything else. Every birthday that passed was another painful reminder. Somewhere her little boy was growing up without her. She kept his room just the way he left it. The small bed with his favorite blanket, the tiny chair in the corner, the toy truck he used to play with now collecting dust. To the world, Luis was gone, but in her heart, he was still here. She just had to find him. And then there was Roger, the brother who was there the day Luis disappeared, the last one to see him before he was taken. Roger was just a kid himself, but the weight of that day never left him. He replayed the moment over and over again in his mind. The laughter, the running, the second he looked away. Could he have stopped it? Could he have done something differently? It wasn't his fault, everyone told him, but that didn't stop the nightmares, the guilt. He grew up carrying the pain into adulthood. Every time he walked past a park, every time he heard a child's laughter, he was taken back to that afternoon in 1951. He had lived his entire life wondering, where was Luis? Was he happy? Did he even know he had a brother who never stopped thinking about him? Detectives did all they could. The missing person posters became faded memories. The case file, once full of fresh leads, gathered dust in storage. Life moved forward. The world changed. The city of Oakland grew. But Luis Albino remained a mystery frozen in time. By the time the 1980s arrived, new missing persons cases took priority. New technology, new faces on the news. The past faded into history. Luis's name became a footnote in old police records, a cold case that no one expected to be solved. Even the Albino family, as much as they hated to admit it, had to accept the painful truth. Luis was never coming back. Luis's mother held on to hope for as long as she could. Every time she saw a young man with familiar features, her heart would skip a beat. Could it be? She'd wonder, staring a little too long at strangers. But it never was. And then, one morning in 2005, she passed away at the age of 92, without ever knowing the truth, without ever hearing her son's voice again, without ever seeing his face, now grown, now changed by time. A mother's love is eternal, but time waits for no one. The search for Luis Albino had come to an end, or so they thought. But what if the story wasn't over? What if, in the age of technology, where DNA could unlock the deepest secrets, the impossible was about to happen? What if, after 70 years of silence, Luis Albino's name was about to be spoken once again? A single test, a simple swab of saliva. That's all it took to unlock a mystery buried for over 70 years. The search for Luis Albino had long been abandoned, until one woman decided to look for answers in the most unexpected place: her own DNA. Alida Aliquin had always been curious about her family's history. Like millions of others, she submitted a sample to an online DNA testing service, expecting to find distant relatives or uncover hidden ancestry. What she never expected was a shocking match. 22%, a strong indication of an immediate family connection. The name attached to that result? Luis Albino. At first, she didn't believe it. It had to be a mistake, a coincidence. But something about it lingered. Could it really be him? Could the uncle her family had whispered about, the boy who had vanished in 1951, still be alive somewhere? If it was true, then where had he been all these years? Who had raised him? And most importantly, did he even know he was taken? Alida couldn't let it go. She dug deeper, reaching out to distant relatives, scouring records, tracing back family connections. The more she searched, the more convinced she became. There was only one way to be sure. She took the results to the Oakland Police Department, the very agency that had once searched for Luis. The case had long been cold, but now, after decades of silence, a new spark had been lit. Detectives listened carefully. They knew DNA doesn't lie, and if there was even a chance that Luis Albino had been found, they had to act. But they needed proof. The FBI was contacted. Agents located the man identified in the DNA results, an elderly gentleman living on the East Coast, far from the California playground where he had last been seen. When agents approached him, they asked a simple question: "Sir, do you know your real name?" The man looked confused. He had lived an entire life under a different identity. He had a different family, different memories, a different history. But as the agents explained why they were there, something in his expression changed. A flicker of something buried deep inside, a forgotten past stirring to the surface. To confirm the truth, a DNA test was conducted. A fresh sample was taken and compared to the genetic profiles of two surviving siblings in California. The results left no doubt. A match, a perfect match. Luis Albino had been found. For the first time in 70 years, his name was spoken with certainty. The lost boy from Jefferson Park was alive. But now an even bigger question remained. How would he react to the truth? Could he remember anything about his past? And after all these years, would he want to go home? The truth had been uncovered. The boy who had vanished without a trace was no longer a mystery. But finding Luis Albino was only the beginning. Now came the hardest part, the reunion. 70 years had passed, 70 years of a life lived under a different name, with a different history. Luis had grown up without any knowledge of the family who had spent decades mourning his disappearance. Now in his old age, he was being told that everything he knew about his past was incomplete, that he had a family waiting for him, that he had been taken. The news was overwhelming. How do you process something like that? How do you reconcile a lifetime of memories with the sudden realization that your story began somewhere else? That the people who raised you were not your real family? That your mother had died never knowing what became of you? That your brother had spent his life searching for you? And yet, despite the confusion, despite the flood of emotions, there was one thing Luis Albino knew for certain. He wanted to meet them. Arrangements were made. The FBI, the California Justice Department, and Oakland Police worked together to bring Luis home. His flight was booked. His journey back to the family he never knew was set in motion. And on June 24th, after more than 7 decades apart, Luis Albino finally reunited with his surviving loved ones. It was a moment frozen in time, the kind of moment that words cannot truly capture. Tears, laughter, long embraces, the weight of 70 years melting away in an instant. For his family, it was nothing short of a miracle, a day they had once believed would never come. But not everyone was there to see it. Luis's mother was gone. She had waited as long as she could, but time had taken her before she could witness the impossible. And then there was Roger, Luis's older brother, the last person to see him that day in the park, the one who had carried the guilt, the pain, the questions for all those years. Roger was there for the reunion. He hugged his brother, spoke with him, spent time by his side, and then, not long after, he passed away. Maybe, just maybe, he had been holding on for this, for that final moment of peace, for the chance to see his brother again, to close a chapter that had haunted him since childhood. Maybe in those last days, Roger finally found the closure he had been searching for. And Luis? After 70 years of being lost, he was home. His family, though smaller than it once was, had never forgotten him. And as he stood there, surrounded by love, surrounded by the echoes of the past and the hope of the present, one thing became clear. He had been found, at last. The reunion had taken place. Luis Albino, once a missing child, had finally been reunited with his family. But after 70 years of separation, what came next? How do you rebuild connections that were lost for a lifetime? How do you fit the pieces of a life that was never supposed to be broken? For Luis, everything had changed. The family he had always known, the identity he had carried for decades, the history he had believed was his own, it had all been rewritten. He wasn't just an ordinary man living on the East Coast anymore. He was a survivor of a mystery that had remained unsolved. Would he move back to California? Would he spend the rest of his life with the family he had just rediscovered? Or would he stay where he was, in the only life he had ever known? These were questions only he could answer, and no matter what choice he made, one thing was certain: he was no longer alone. His niece, Alida Aliquin, the woman who had uncovered the truth through a simple DNA test, had given her family something they never thought possible: closure. She had pulled her uncle's name from the depths of history and brought him back into the arms of those who had never stopped loving him. The investigation into his kidnapping remains open. The details of who took him, how he was raised, and why his true identity was never revealed are still being explored. Maybe one day those answers will come. Maybe one day the full story will be known. But for now, the most important piece of the puzzle has been found. Luis Albino is no longer missing. And while the years may have been lost, one thing remains: he is home. At last, he is home.